I was driving back from a work trip through West Virginia in October 2012, trying to push through and get home instead of stopping for the night. That was my first bad decision. It was around 10 p.m. on Route 219, middle of nowhere, dark mountains and trees on both sides. I'm going along fine when suddenly my dashboard lights up like a Christmas tree. Every single warning light at once. Then there's this loud pop from under the hood, and the car stalls. Engine cuts, power steering goes, the whole car is dead. I managed to coast onto the shoulder before rolling to a dead stop. I sat there for a minute cursing my luck, then pulled out my phone to call AAA. I was surrounded by mountains, so of course, no service. I tried walking around the car holding my phone up like an idiot. Still nothing. I'm sitting on the side of this dark highway out in the sticks, with a dead car and no way to call anyone. After maybe 10 minutes, not a single car had gone by in either direction. I figured I could either sit in my car twiddling my thumbs, hoping someone would eventually come along, or I could start walking. I remembered passing a sign for Hillsboro a little ways back. Couldn't have been more than a few miles. So I locked up the car, grabbed my jacket, and started walking north. It wasn't terrible at first. Cool fall night, full moon, clear sky, and lots of stars since there's zero light pollution out there. The road was pretty deserted, but I kept my ears open for any vehicles coming along. My eyes adjusted after a while and I could see the road okay. I was making decent time, maybe half an hour in, when I started hearing these popping sounds off in the distance. At first, I thought maybe it was a car backfiring somewhere, or hunters or something like that. But it was 10:30 at night, so the last one seemed less likely. The pops kept going, and as I walked, they seemed to be getting closer together and louder. I slowed down a bit, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but the echoes made it hard to pinpoint. Then I heard drums, sharp and clean in a rhythm meant for marching. That's when I started getting uncomfortable. The popping was still going, and now there were drums, and I had no explanation for any of it. I kept walking because what else was I going to do? I could have gone back to my car, but there was no guarantee that would solve anything. I figured getting to the town was my best bet. The drumming got louder, and the popping sounds were almost constant now. This went on for a bit before I heard people moving through the woods off to my left. There was crashing through the brush. It sounded like a lot of people, maybe a whole group running. I stopped and stared into the trees but couldn't see anything besides the inky blackness left by the shadows cast from the moonlight. Confusion was setting in. What my ears were hearing wasn't what my eyes were telling me was real. I started walking faster, almost jogging. That's when the shouting started, but I couldn't make out words. They were distant but all around me, in the woods on both sides of the road. Men shouting, some of it sounding like commands or orders. The drumming was louder. The popping was everywhere now, constant, and I realized it sounded like gunfire. I continued to jog, my head whipping around trying to see something, anything, but there was nothing there. Just sounds pressing in from all sides. The shouting got louder, more frantic. I could still hear people running. It was like a stampede. And the drums and the gunfire, and it all felt like it was about to crush me. I broke into a full sprint. Panic overtook me. I wanted nothing more than to get away from whatever this was. Then there was this boom, deep and massive, like thunder right on top of me, and I felt it in my chest and through the ground. Next thing I know, everything stopped. Just like that, silence. It took me a couple of minutes to realize it was all over. The night was completely quiet, except for crickets and an owl somewhere. My hands were shaking, but I could smell it. Gunpowder. That sharp, burnt smell hanging in the air. I stood there for a good while, my knees weak, trying to understand what had just happened. Then I kept walking, because I didn't know what else to do. My legs felt like jelly, and sweat was pouring down my face even though it was cold out. I was looking over my shoulder, into the woods, expecting it to start again. Maybe 15 minutes later, I saw headlights coming up from behind. An old pickup truck slowed down, and this elderly guy rolled down his window to ask if I needed help. I must have looked like hell, but he was too polite to mention it. He gave me a ride to Hillsborough. It turns out he lived there, and he let me use his landline to call my insurance company. Tow truck came and took my car to Lewisburg. Come to find out, my alternator completely fried. I didn't tell the old guy or the tow truck driver what I had heard. But later I looked it up. Droop Mountain Battlefield is right there where I broke down. It was a big Civil War battle in 1863, and I think I heard it. I can't prove it and it sounds crazy, but that's my best guess with all the gunfire, drums, and men fighting. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. But also, looking back, kind of incredible. I wouldn't want to do it again though. We rented a cabin in the mountains near Boone, North Carolina last fall for a week. My husband wanted to take the kids hiking, and I just needed a break from work. We'd been talking about a family getaway for a while, and finally made it happen. Third day in, my husband took the kids into town to give me some time to myself. They went there to check out some shops and get some ice cream. I decided to go for a solo hike, grabbed my jacket since it was getting cold out, filled my water bottle, and headed out around 10 a.m. I was out there for hours. The trail looped around and I took a few side paths, exploring the area and enjoying the silence. It must have been around 2 p.m. when I started smelling something. It actually smelled really good, like something cooking. I figured I must have hiked close to the town, or maybe there was a campground nearby. Since I was feeling hungry by this time, I went to see if I could buy something. I followed the smell for maybe 10 minutes. I wasn't really thinking about it, simply walking in that general direction and following my nose. I realized pretty quickly I'd gone off the trail, but if I was near the town like I thought, I figured I could meet up with my family, so I wasn't worried about that. I didn't even think about checking the map on my phone, since I was sure I was going the right direction. Then I came out into a clearing and there was a cabin. It was small, old-looking, and probably built decades ago. The chimney had smoke coming out of it. That's what I'd been smelling. There was a garden plot off to one side, mostly done for the season, but with some winter squash still growing. I stopped, realizing I was on someone's property now. It was then that I noticed the bones. They were tied to trees around the clearing with what looked like twine or wire. They were animal bones, deer skulls, small mammal bones, and bird skeletons. Some were old and weathered, some looked newer. They were arranged in little groups all around and at different heights. I hadn't seen them walking in, but now that I noticed them, they were everywhere I looked. Instantly, I was creeped out and wondering what I had walked into. There was no good reason I could come up with to why someone would do that. I was turned around, taking them all in, when I heard the cabin door open up behind me. I spun around and there was an old woman standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything, but her eyes bore right through me. She was small, thin, wearing a dark dress or maybe a long shirt. I honestly can't remember the details of what she had on, but I remember her face, very lined, weathered, and her eyes were fixed on me. "I'm so sorry," I said. I didn't know anyone lived out here. I was hiking and I smelled your cooking, and I guess I wandered off the trail. I'm really sorry for trespassing." She was stone silent, which only made the creepiness increase. I waited for maybe 5 seconds before I backed up a few steps, mumbled another apology, and walked back the way I had come. I could feel her watching me the entire time. I didn't look back until I was well into the trees, and when I did, she was still standing in the doorway. A little shiver ran through me as I walked away. I found the trail again and got back to our cabin around 4 p.m. My husband and kids were already back. I didn't mention the old woman or the bones. My mind was preoccupied for the rest of the night, hearing all the fun things they did in town. I had a bad dream that night. I don't remember what it was about, but I woke up suddenly around 2 a.m. and I couldn't move. My eyes were open. I was awake, but my body wouldn't respond. I tried to sit up and tried to call out to my husband next to me, but nothing came out. I could breathe fine, but it felt difficult, like something was making it harder. I'd never had sleep paralysis before. I'd heard about it, but never experienced it. It was terrifying. I laid there, fully conscious, trapped in my own body, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I could move my fingers, then my hand, then suddenly it all released and I could move again. I got up and went to the bathroom, drank some water, then went out and sat on the couch in the living room for about an hour. It took that long before I felt calm enough to go back to bed. I figured it was stress, or sleeping in an unfamiliar place, or maybe I'd slept in a weird position. The next night it happened again. Same thing. Woke up and couldn't move. But this time there was a weight on my chest, as if someone had laid a heavy blanket on me. It took longer to break out of it too. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes of struggling before I could move. The following day I spent with my family and did normal vacation stuff. It felt good to be around them and helped me forget the last 2 nights. I didn't mention the sleep paralysis. That night it happened again, but even worse this time. The weight on my chest was heavier, and I had this overwhelming sense that something was in the room with me. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. 4th night, same thing. I was starting to dread going to sleep. I'd lie there for hours, afraid to close my eyes, and then I'd finally pass out from exhaustion, and it would happen again. The weight, the feeling of something there, the inability to move or scream. 5th night, or last night, I woke up to the familiar paralysis and the weight on my chest, but this time I saw something. A shadow, darker than the rest of the dark room, moving near the foot of my bed. Then it darted out of the room fast, like it had been startled. I could move again immediately after that. We left the next morning. I was exhausted, dragging my feet the whole time we packed, running on maybe 10 hours of sleep total for the week. My husband kept asking if I was okay because I looked terrible. I told him I just hadn't been sleeping well. Immediately, once we got home, it stopped. I slept fine that first night back, and every night since. No paralysis, no weight, no presence. I felt rested again. I woke up that morning practically laughing because I was so happy. My husband asked what had happened to put me in such a good mood. I told him it was good to be home. It's been a few months now, and I've been thinking about it more. When it was all going on, I chalked it up to a new place, stress, or a weird sleep schedule. But it was every single night after I found that cabin, and it stopped the moment I left. Now I've kind of tied it to that old woman and those bones tied to the trees. This sounds silly, but I think I was hexed for trespassing on her property. I don't know if she did something, or if I'm just connecting things that aren't related. I could be clutching at straws on this one. but something in my gut tells me I'm right. Call it a woman's intuition. I've worked in law enforcement for over 15 years, all in eastern Kentucky. I won't say exactly where because I don't want to be sent up for a psych eval, but where I'm from, it's a really small area. We've got about a half a dozen deputies covering the whole county most nights, and if one's tied up, the rest of us are stretched thin. Back in the spring of 2019, we'd been getting reports of late-night traffic on an old back road. There isn't much traffic back there since it's narrow, rough, and dead ends near a closed lumber mill. Not the kind of place anyone uses unless they know where it goes. Folks were saying they'd seen unfamiliar trucks heading through there after midnight. With the drug traffic we get off I-64, it sounded worth checking out. I volunteered to sit on that road one night. It's quiet country, farmland, some forests, and a few abandoned barns along the way. I parked my cruiser at a pull-off where I could watch both directions. It was close to 2 a.m. when I saw the first lights. Headlights, way down the road. I remember thinking, finally, someone's moving through here. I leaned forward in my seat and waited for the car to get closer, except it never did. The lights kept coming, but slow. Slower than someone doing the speed limit would go, especially at night. Maybe 10 miles an hour, if that. That road isn't great, but it's not that bad. I figured maybe they were lost or drunk, so I stayed put, ready to pull them over when they passed. Another few minutes went by. The lights hadn't reached me yet, and the road was straight enough that I should have seen or even heard the vehicle by now. I pulled out and started down the road toward them. My dash cam was rolling. As I got closer, the lights dimmed a little, like foggy halogens through mist. I kept expecting to see a car shape behind them. At about half a mile, they were still there, bright white-yellow, side by side like low beams. Then they vanished. There's no turnoffs, driveways, or dips where they could have gone. Nothing but trees in a narrow ditch. I slowed down, scanned both sides with my spotlight, and saw no dust, no glow of taillights, and didn't hear the sound of an engine. I sat in the middle of the road scratching my head, then turned around and went back to my original spot. I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what that was about. About halfway back to my spot, and I looked in my rearview mirror. The same two lights were back. They were more faint this time. I pulled over and waited, thinking maybe someone was messing with me. Could be a couple of teenagers trying to scare the sheriff. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. The lights didn't get closer. They just hovered there, not moving at all. I turned around again and drove toward them. Same thing. The closer I got, the dimmer they got, then gone. Now I was properly confused. I radioed dispatch, told them I had possible activity where I was, but didn't need backup yet. I parked where I'd seen them and killed my headlights. An hour passed with nothing remarkable happening. I poured myself a cup of coffee from my thermos to keep awake. Then, right around 3:30, I saw the lights again, except they weren't on the road this time. They were off to my right, deep in a field that bordered the woods. 2 points of light moving slowly between the trees. I got out of the cruiser, grabbed my flashlight, and crossed the ditch. The ground was uneven and muddy from a storm earlier that week. The lights moved further back as I approached, weaving around tree trunks. I thought maybe someone was spotlighting deer, but the movement didn't fit. It wasn't swinging like a handheld light. It was smooth and steady. Now, not that I think they were this, but it's the best way I have to describe them. They were ghostly. I called out, "Sheriff's office, stop right there." No answer. The lights paused for maybe a second, then drifted deeper into the trees. And I kept following, careful not to trip on roots. The further I went, the quieter everything got. My own footsteps were loud in the mud. The lights stayed just far enough ahead that my beam couldn't catch what was making them. I yelled again, "This is the sheriff's department." Of course, I got no response, but the way they acted told me something important. They weren't human. Usually someone doing something they shouldn't would run when I said that, and people who aren't doing anything wrong will stop and see why I'm calling them. These lights didn't do either. After 5 more minutes of following, I stopped. My gut told me to quit while I still knew which direction the road was. I backed out slowly, eyes on those lights until they finally faded completely. Back at my cruiser, I felt stupid, sweaty and muddy. I drove back to my original position and waited there until dawn. The lights came back twice more that night, both times on the road where I'd first seen them. I didn't follow again. When daylight hit, I drove the whole stretch. There were no footprints where I'd gone into the field, just my own tracks. I even checked the ditches for reflectors, old glass, anything that could have bounced light back. I didn't find a thing. I turned my dashcam footage over to our IT guy. He said it was useless, static and exposure flickers, like the camera was trying to adjust for something bright that wasn't there. I went back out one more night the following week, partly out of stubbornness. Sat there till sunrise and didn't see a damn thing. We never did catch any drug runners on that road. The calls about suspicious traffic stopped around the same time I quit going out there. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I've heard people talk about ghost lights or spook lights before, usually old stories from out west or swamp country, but I'd never seen anything like it myself. These weren't blue or floating high. They looked like plain old headlights. I don't tell this story much. Cops are already magnets for weird stories, and no one wants to sound like they've gone superstitious. Whatever those lights were, they weren't man-made. And that's all I'm going to say on the subject. You can make your own opinion on what they were. I moved out to northern Alabama a few months ago, just outside Bankhead National Forest, mostly to get away from, well, life, I guess. My wife passed away a while back, and I needed quiet. I rented this little trailer at the edge of my cousin's property. It was nothing fancy. Enough space to breathe, a radio that barely picked up anything past the AM stations, and a view of the woods that was supposed to be peaceful. Anyway, the first night, around 2 a.m., I heard something moving outside. My dog, Crumpet, a little mutt I got for some company, perked up and started growling toward the tree line. I figured it was probably a deer or a coyote, so I shrugged it off. But then I started hearing this dragging sound. It was long and drawn out. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam caught a flash of something pale, standing just past the clearing. I swear it looked like an arm, or maybe a leg, but by the time I focused, it was gone. I called out, thinking maybe a neighbor was playing a prank. I got no response, and then the rain started to spit and my dog was growling low, so I went back inside. That was the first time. Over the next week, it kept happening. I'd hear the dragging sounds late at night. Sometimes there would be knocks or soft thumps on the side of the trailer. In the mornings, I started noticing stones arranged in odd patterns near the tree line. Small little piles of them, sometimes just 3 or 4 rocks stacked in a line. My cousin told me I was imagining things. I didn't argue, but the dog refused to go outside at night. When I would coax her out, she would stare at the edge of the woods, hackles up and tail tucked, like she saw something I didn't. One morning, I had put her outside so I could clean the place without her getting under my feet. When I went outside to check on her, I found her leash stretched taut. She had run under the camper as far as she could go to get away from the tree line. I looked around to see what had spooked her, and found the ground was torn up. And as I got closer to the trees, there was a trail of white hair snagged in the bark of a pine. This stuff was thick and coarse, almost felt like a light grit sandpaper. I didn't know what to make of it all, but when the night came, it got all too real to ignore. There was a storm, and the power went out. Crumpet was going nuts by the door, and she's never been scared of thunder before. When I went to pick her up and calm her down, I looked through the window by the door. Something was out there. I took a flashlight and stepped outside to see what kind of idiot would be walking around in this weather. My light landed on it. It was standing maybe 40 feet away, just beyond the clearing in the rain. Pale, tall, and I got a pretty good look of it for a bit, but my brain couldn't reconcile what I was seeing. I froze, kind of dumbfounded. Rain was coming down in sheets, and the lightning would add to my light to make it clear what I was seeing. My dog whimpered behind me. The creature out there didn't move toward me, didn't make a sound. After a few seconds, my brain finally clicked. This isn't human. And that's when I backed inside. I did it calmly, mostly out of shock. I just went back to my trailer, locked the door, and didn't look outside for the rest of the night. In the morning, I found 3 stones stacked on the hood of my truck. Perfectly balanced, smooth river stones that hadn't been there before. The same thing I'd been seeing all week across my property. I didn't sleep much that day. A week later, I packed what I could into my truck and drove to the nearest town and got a small apartment. I've been back to visit my cousin and haven't seen it since then. My dog seems fine now, though she's quieter than usual, and she's never liked the woods anyway. I've tried to tell myself it was the lightning and rain that made a tree look weird, but that doesn't explain the rocks and how Crumpet was acting. There have been White Thang stories around here as far back as I can remember. I don't have any hard evidence that's what I saw, but I do have a hunch. I go backpacking a few times a year, usually solo, and I prefer the really remote spots. Sometimes I need to be away from any other person to really recharge my batteries. Last spring, I was out in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, maybe 20 miles from the nearest town. It's all national forest out there, barely any trails, and you can hike for hours without seeing even a sign of human beings. While I have been in that forest before, this was a new part of it for me. I'd set up a primitive campsite near a ridgeline. My tent, sleeping bag, and basic gear. It was the kind of place you have to dig your own latrine. Second day there, I found a creek about a quarter mile from camp, and decided to follow it for a while. The water was clear and cold, probably spring-fed, and it wound through some really nice terrain. After 10 minutes, I came to a holler that cut down away from the creek. It looked interesting, so I worked my way down into it. The ground was soft, lots of leaf litter, and it was quiet down there. The kind of quiet that shuts your brain down and you can relax. I closed my eyes for a bit and soaked in the silence. When I opened them again, I noticed some broken glass. Mason jars, shattered and scattered around in the leaves. I was kind of bummed because it was a reminder that civilization exists. Still, after I got over that, I checked them out more closely and realized they were really old. Then I saw it, an old Moonshine still. The light caught a bit of the brass even though it was completely covered in leaves and overgrowth. The copper was tarnished and parts of it were rusted or broken, but you could tell exactly what it had been. There was a stone furnace base, some rotted wooden barrels, and more broken jars. The whole setup was maybe 30 or 40 feet across. I'm a bit of a history nerd, so this was a really cool find. I started poking around, carefully, looking at how it was all set up. I was following a trail of broken glass when I found the shell casings, a lot of them, .45 caliber mostly, with a few brass bases from old shotgun shells mixed in. They were scattered in one area like someone had dumped them there, or there'd been a shooting. They were old, corroded, but there were dozens of them. That changed the vibe a bit. Stills were illegal operations, and people died at these places. There were raids, rival gangs, or accidents. I was suddenly very aware I was alone in the woods at the site, where something bad had probably happened. I found one mason jar that was intact, sitting there in the leaves. Figured it would make a good souvenir, something to remember the find. I picked it up, brushed it off, and started heading back out of the holler. That's when I heard it, talking, a man's voice, low, like someone speaking to someone else nearby. I stopped and looked around. No one was there, and the voice stopped almost as soon as it had started. I called out, "Hello?" Got no response. I stood there looking around for a second, but it was quiet again. I kind of shrugged it off and got out of there. It was probably my imagination or something. The rest of the day was normal. Made dinner, filtered some water, and read for a bit. When it got dark, I turned in, but I couldn't fall asleep. It happens sometimes when I'm camping. My brain won't shut off and I start thinking about lots of different stuff. I was lying there in my tent, checking my watch periodically. 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight. That's when I heard a vehicle engine. Whatever truck was coming up this way, and it had to be a truck since no car would make it up there. I felt sorry for it with how rough that motor sounded. I unzipped my tent and got out, looked around for any headlights. Last thing I wanted was to be run over in my sleep or something. The sound was coming from the direction of the holler where the still was. The nearest forest road was miles away, and I couldn't think of any reason someone would be driving all the way up where I was. The engine sound stopped. Then I heard voices. Multiple people, talking, coming from the same direction. I could see lamplight, flickering in orange, moving around down in that holler maybe a few hundred yards away. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The still site wasn't that far from my camp, but who would be down there was beyond me. I started to smell smoke now like from a fire, and I decided to go check it out. Maybe what I thought was lamplight was actually a forest fire starting somehow. I grabbed my headlight but didn't turn it on just yet, because I still wasn't sure what those voices in vehicle meant. Moving slowly through the trees toward the lights, I was being quiet, stepping carefully, unsure of what I was walking into. As I got closer, I could hear the voices more clearly. Men's voices, multiple people, and they were arguing. I stopped maybe 50 yards away and crouched behind some trees. The lights were definitely in the holler where the still was. The smell of smoke was stronger. The arguing was getting louder. I decided this was a bad idea. Whatever was happening down there, whether it was people illegally using the old still site, or some kind of dispute or whatever, I didn't want any part of it. I started backing away, moving as quietly as I could. I had taken maybe 2 steps when I heard a single gunshot. It echoed through the holler. I dropped down instinctively, held my breath, and listened for anything else. I waited for maybe 30 seconds and then risked a look back toward the holler. The lights were gone. The smoke smell had faded. Everything was completely quiet again. I stayed crouched there for a few minutes, just to be sure. It was clear. No more voices, no lights, and no movement. Finally, I worked my way down to the still site, this time with my headlamp on. The site looked exactly like I'd left it in the afternoon. No fresh footprints, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there. No fire, no people, nothing disturbed. Just the old still covered in overgrowth and the broken glass in the leaves. I went back to my campsite and barely slept. Every sound had me on edge. I packed up at first light and hiked out that morning, cutting my trip short by a day. I don't know. I kind of think I might have been dreaming or something. I could have fallen asleep and not realized it. Or maybe I did see something that night. I don't usually think on it too hard, and the only reason it came to my mind was because I read a story that was kind of similar. But I do still have that mason jar. It's up on my bookshelf.
You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Spoopy Cola.